if the Lord don't change my mind. The gifts, spiritual gifts. Good evening.
Good evening.
Welcome. Thank you. Good to be here. This is the first Wednesday night of a new year, isn't it? You having problems writing 2023? Oh, one. Yeah. Well, it's good to see all of you. We have people watching already. We're glad for that. Now that we have people watching now, I don't know what I've done with my glasses. Yeah, would you go look, please? Because we're going to have them. I'll get wound up and we'll be here all night. Y'all don't want that. Oh, those of you who are watching, we're waiting on my glasses, okay? It's a senior moment. Did you find them? Oh, those are the ones. You don't have to be a smarty pants. No, those are not my glasses. They're not mine.
I know. You're going to have to wear them, though.
Mine are there somewhere. Somebody come up and talk for a minute. I'm going to find my glasses. Where are you girls going? Here? Well, excuse me, those of you who are watching on Facebook Live, I lost my glasses. I'm afraid I can't talk without them. I don't know whose those are. Well, it's good to be here tonight. They said I'm coming through loud and clear. That's good. Let me make some announcements, and then I want us to go over our prayer list together. Appreciate Brother Clark handling Sunday night. Appreciate Brother Darren taking care of grief group Saturday afternoon. We enjoyed our time with the boys, got them home. Krieger fell and broke his arm after they got home. They had to take him and have it set today. I'm sorry he broke his arm, but I'm sure glad it didn't happen here. you know, way it goes. Thank you to our cooks and those of you who took care of the meal tonight. Everything's kind of out of kilter because we couldn't get into the kitchen area. Been working on it, but I appreciate y'all adapting and overcoming like the Marine Corps. Good. Good food, too. People were saying, well, we have to cut back a little because it's a new year. It's not Super Bowl yet. Keep eating. All right? Haitian school offerings this Sunday, the 29th, is Youth Sunday and last Sunday lunch. See, we're already talking about eating again. But anyway. Let's look over our prayer list together, and then we're going to move into the last section in Romans chapter 13 tonight. I know you all pray for our missionaries, Brother Norcellus, Chris Martinez, and Kendra Barnett. I hope you pray for them daily. Keep praying for Bob and Nadine Spears. Tom Teehee is walking on a foot cast, but that's coming off, and he'll be wearing a shoe pretty soon, so remember him. Asked to pray for our brother Albert Luther. Albert's going into this month, I believe, to a church in Kentucky. They're looking for a pastor, and he's looking for a church. Hope that works out well for them. Lord has his will. Keep praying for Sandra Shreve. Missy is going to Colorado, see a doctor later this month. Keep praying for Randy and Donna Spears. Keep praying for Shirley and Billy Wilson, my aunt and my cousin. Rick Reed, I haven't heard a report on Rick in a few days, but keep lifting him up. Anybody heard a report? Okay. Philip Warren is recuperating from 2 surgeries within 1 month. Keep praying for Brother Charlie Washington. Sarah Rose Washington, that's Joy's mother, she had a stroke. And I got to visit with them just a little bit today. She's very stable right now, but remember them. Martin Ramirez, that is Mary Brown's brother-in-law. Remember, pray for him. And I saw on our church's prayer partner group, Merle Christian, had some kind of eye surgery today. I haven't heard any reports lately on Ed Marshall. That's kind of a fast rundown. Keep praying for Brother Jay. Brother Jay, you going to the doctor?
Been to the doctor, have a appointment for an ultrasound a week from this Friday.
Okay. All right, keep praying for Brother Jay. Who would you need to mention tonight, or add, or delete from our prayer list?
Third row at the top, Joy Appleby. I think you can take her off because she's out running around. She's been
Remembering Dale Draper. Mary Beth called me the other night, and they had been to the grocery store. She took the groceries in, put the groceries away. He was carrying 2 cases of pop, and she couldn't find him, so she went out there. He was laying on the ground.
Oh.
She said, Dale, what are you doing down there? He said, I'm just taking out the leaves. He had fell and got tangled up somehow with his cane, and I don't know. But anyway, kind of humorous that, so just pray for him.
Next to, also third row down for the bottom. If that's the Betty Mason that I had put on there, she's passed away. Might be a different one.
All right. Dale Draper's on that same row, so let's highlight Dale and remember to pray for him. Who else? Yeah, I mentioned her. She had, I think she had an eye surgery today. Okay. Yeah, keep praying for Logan and Sarah Beth and Angie and Gary. Got to visit with them briefly yesterday.
Joshua's tomorrow, I think it's tomorrow. It's also that everything's looking good. We'll take the, they call it the pick line, cord thing. They're gonna take it out. He's been going out there once a week to get it refilled. His deal.
All right, y'all keep praying for Josh. Anybody else have a prayer request? Update someone?
Irene Griscom family.
Thank you.
Irene Griscom.
The family of Irene Griscom.
She's the one who had the
Anyone else? You all act like you ate one too many pieces of Sandy's cake and spaghetti.
very good.
Yeah. Supper was good tonight, y'all. I'm sorry, for people who are more refined, dinner. My house, we had breakfast, dinner was at noon, and supper was in the evening. Can I give glory? We weren't cultured, we were just country, and we liked it that way. All right, anybody else? Well, let's pray over these. Pray for Sunday services, please. I'm going to start a series about worship I'll tell you more about that Sunday morning when we start, but kind of do an introductory sermon, and been fun getting ready for this, so I'm looking forward to preaching. Got too much material, but I can divide it up into 2 weeks. But anyway, let's pray together. Doyle, would you lead our prayer for us, please, sir?
Being there for us to call on, being there, knowing everything,
Yes.
knowing it's before we even do. Praise you, pray for the Lord. These conventions, help in every way that they need, all of you need, know what they need. We know that you'll be there for them. Ask the blessings on this church. Help our pastors, help us all to carry your word out into the community. In Son's name, amen.
Amen. Thank you. We're still in Romans chapter 13, but we're going to finish this section. I don't know if we'll finish it tonight, but verses 10 through 14. Romans chapter number 13, verses 10 through 14. In the first part of this chapter, Paul taught us about being subject to the powers that be, the higher powers, the governmental authorities. And then in the second section, we talked about the debt we owe to all mankind, and that is to love one another. And we spent a few weeks on that. I titled, as you see on your copy of the outline that you have, titled this section, It's Time. It's Time. And if you're familiar with these verses we're going to read, 10 through 14 in a moment, you know the backdrop and why I chose that for my title. In that previous section, Paul was talking about loving your neighbor. And he says we have to pay a debt that we owe to all mankind, and that is to love him or her. But in this particular section, Paul is going to underscore and magnify, if you will. He wants it to leap out as best as possible that there is a sense of urgency about doing that. All right? And this could relate back to even the first section that had to do with submitting ourselves to the powers that God has put in place. So I want to read these verses 10 through 14, Romans 13, and then we'll dive right into this. All right? Verse 10 is a continuum of what he was talking about, of loving your neighbor. He says, love worketh no ill toward his neighbor. Therefore, love is the fulfilling of the law. And that, so it's all tied together, knowing the time, that now it is high time to awake out of sleep. One of these days I'm going to preach on that and preach on sleeping in church, but probably not here. I'll probably do it at a revival somewhere, all right? I'm sorry, I got sidetracked. To awaken out of our sleep, for now is our salvation nearer than when we believed. The night is far spent, the day is at hand. Let us therefore cast off the works of darkness, and let us put on the armor of light. Let us walk honestly as in the day, not in rioting and drunkenness, not in chambering and wantonness, not in strife and envying, but put ye on the Lord Jesus Christ, and make no provision for the flesh to fulfill the lusts thereof. So relating back to loving one another, fulfilling the law and doing so, he is emphatic that there is this urgency about doing that. Now, when I read this, he said, now it's time. It's high time. Our salvation is nearer than when we believed. And I've heard a lot of sermons that have been preached on this text based on the fact that this world is going to come to an end. And if you are a student of the Bible and you've read the New Testament, there are several passages from several different writers, and the indication was they believed that Jesus was going to come back before they died. Even many of those who walked with him, who had seen him, as John said, we saw him, we heard him, we touched him, we handled the word of truth. And they thought he was going to come back before they died. I've told you before, my grandfather, my Grandpa Young, he was a deacon in a Baptist church. And I remember hearing him and all the other adult men talking on Sunday afternoons after church. And they thought the Lord would come back in their lifetime. And frankly, I still believe the Lord will come back in my lifetime. But we have to live like we believe that. See, and that's the problem. We don't. We just got drawn into this lull of lapsing, and we forget one of these days the trumpet's going to sound, the voice of the archangel, and the dead in Christ are going to rise first, and we who are alive and remain will be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet him in the air, and so shall we ever be with the Lord. But I don't think we live in light of that. But I'm telling you, as Christians, we look around at the direction our world is headed. We've got to understand, we're not promised much more time. So we have to live in light of that. So, with that backdrop in mind, we're going to look mainly at verses 11 through 14. First of all, it's time to wake up. It's time to wake up as children of God. We need to wake up, first of all, to take advantage of the opportunities that we've been given. We need to wake up. It's time to wake up to get going to the advantages we've been giving. And then what was he talking about before that? To love those around us. You see how this ties in? Paul is saying, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. Love works no ill to his neighbor. Therefore, love is the fulfilling of the law. And you don't have a lot of time to do that. I don't think... We always think we've got time. We always do. I remember as my dad grew older, and I remember listening to him, and I didn't understand it then because I wasn't old then, but now I are old, and I know, and we think, man, I'm 60. Man, I hope I live to be 70. And I remember when Dad was 70, I hope the Lord lets me live to be 80. And then after he was 80, he said, I hope the Lord lets me live to be 90. And if he'd have made 90, I guarantee you he would have said, I hope the Lord lets me live to be 100. So we want more time. But we want more time, and so often we believe that we have more time. So we need to wake up and realize that it is time. All right? Yeah. So I was thinking about this relative to loving one another, love fulfilling the law, working no ill toward his neighbor, and fulfilling the law. I'll just talk about me, okay? I don't know how you are, but I got a feeling many of you, truthfully, we're the same way. There's so many times I, and perhaps you, those of you who are watching, we go beyond the second mile in looking for people to love in Romania, in Haiti, in other countries. And we forget that there are people close to us, listen, sometimes in our own families, that need to realize the love of Christ. And I'm going to tell you, when that thought hit me, I wrote it in my notes, all right? I know there was a time in my life when I neglected the opportunity to love people even in my own family because I disagreed with them at the time. So that leads to this next thought. We need to take advantage, take time to wake up and take advantage of the opportunities that he's given us. And then I want to talk about loving those that are sometimes not very lovable. I hated to use the word unlovely, but it seemed to fit, but that's what I chose. I started to say the unlovable, but none of us is unlovable because God has extended his love to all of us, all right? this goes back to what I said a moment ago. We look at needs in foreign countries, and I'm glad that we have people who are mission-minded, and they want to respond to those needs and help with those needs. And you all know I have a heart for Haiti because I've been there and I've seen what it's like. And if everyone had an opportunity to go there, now's not a good time, but you too would have a burden for that and for what Brother Norcellus is doing with what he has there. But there are people around us that are not very lovable. And there are people around us that by our standards, and I know it sounds judgmental, and I don't mean to be that way, they're not very lovely. And it amazes me how much we can go out of our way to help somebody who's way over there, and yet our eyes are blinded to those who are right here. When I was youth pastor, we ran buses back then, and it was kind of the norm for churches to try to bring in as many kids as they could, and a lot of people got saved from it. I'll be honest with you, from that particular ministry, I never saw a lot of families come into the church as a result of the salvation of kids, but I have known of bus students who got saved that didn't grow up in a Christian home, and they went on and surrendered their lives to ministry and served God in mission fields, served God as pastors and in other areas. So it's a good ministry. But I remember that there were people in the church. Because a lot of times when you've got a big group of kids in church and they're not trained, they weren't raised in church, they're noisy. And sometimes they don't dress right. And sometimes they don't smell good. And sometimes they don't talk right. And I heard those things. I mean, it don't take long for things to trickle back to the preacher because somebody's always listening and somebody will always tell. You need to remember that, all right? You may think whatever you're saying, you're just saying to somebody, but it'll get back to whoever, all right? And oh, yeah, somebody said, oh, well, let's bow and have prayer right now. But anyway, same thing going to church camp. I know there were churches that go up around to every kid in their community, and all year long, those little churches had just worked their fingers to the bone raising money to pay these kids' way to church camp. And I know there were churches there that were a little more refined than them, and they'd say, what are they doing bringing all of them nasty kids there? Those kids got saved. So, do you get where I'm going about sometimes loving those that are not very lovely? Loving the unlovely, sometimes loving the unlovable. As I was preparing my notes for this, I read something, this one preacher, and I'll just kind of read it to you. It wasn't mine. I'm just telling you this is what he said. He told a story about a couple who brought some clothing down to the church one day for the rescue mission, which would be like Grace Place or Helping Hands or someplace like that. And the lady of the family, she was very vocal about being concerned, greatly concerned, about the poor people's need for proper clothing. But the preacher said he looked at her and looked at her husband and noticed he had to hold his pants up with a nail because his clothes were so tattered, too big for him. And he said his heart was broken personally because he didn't care that much for other people. Didn't mean to get preachy, but it's true. We sometimes we get wrapped up in our safety of our cocoon, and we don't want to come out and spread our wings and fly.
Well, if you did, it's a lot easier to help somebody in another country.
Yeah.
You don't see that country.
Yeah.
You don't see a lot about it. And it's not in your face. And yet, as you say, somebody around you, you'll see them every day.
Yeah. I went on a mission trip to El Salvador several years ago. Brother Marvin Lloyd led it. we got over there, and the first night we stayed in San Salvador at a really nice hotel, and it wasn't a whole lot different than being in the United States, except they didn't all speak English. And the next day we got up, and it was Sunday, and we drove out of San Salvador is a humongous city, all right? We drove past a stadium, and I mean, it was full. And it's, Brother Marvin, what is that? And he said, football. I'm thinking, no, that's soccer, but over there they call it football. I said, how many will that stadium seat? It seated well over 100,000, all right? So not much different here. We were driving outside, got just to the edge of town, and by the way, a volcano had erupted, and there was lava rocks all over the edge of the road. They didn't bother to pick them up. They just moved them over. And we came out, here we go again, Sunday afternoon, and I looked over there, and I couldn't see behind this wall, but there were cars everywhere. I said, what's this? One of the El Salvadorian people that was a chauffeur and said, NASCAR. So those people there in the city, they were much different from us. So we got outside San Salvador, and we stopped in a little village, and I don't know if you know much about Latino people. Time doesn't mean nearly as much to them as it does to us. But we stopped, and they had withheld having their service that day till we got there. Well, Brother Marvin knew I played the guitar, and he said, they want you to play the guitar and us to sing. I said, okay, I just want to get where we're going. Okay, you know me, but we've got a schedule to meet. I didn't know what it was, but I knew we had one. So Brother Marvin and this guy and I got in this old jalopy car that we probably had to push to start, and we drove all over this village, stopping at people's houses. You got a guitar? I'm sure that's what they were. Finally, they found a guitar. We came back, and by this time, I'm livid. In my Americanized culture, I'm livid. All right, so I tuned the thing, and we sang a few songs, and we were told emphatically, don't drink the water. We're supposed to drink water out of bottles. You know why? Well, they'd made Kool-Aid and cookies for us. Well, I'm sorry to tell you, we drank the Kool-Aid. We spent the next 2 days at the outhouse when we got to our compound. But I'm thinking all of El Salvador is like what we saw in the city. And the further out we got, the more I realized it wasn't. And then when we got to the compound, the earthquake had destroyed part of this. It was a dormitory because they had a Bible college there for El Salvadorian preachers. Well, there was about an 8-foot wall that was built out of trees around this thing. We went in and we got in there, and they closed the gate behind us and said, don't leave. Well, I wanted to know why. You know me, I'm inquisitive. And they said, this particular area, they're not too fond of Christians, especially American Christians. And if you leave, they could kill you. And I thought, I've never driven to church worried that somebody was going to shoot me because I'm a Christian. I've left church afraid a few people were going to shoot me after a few things I said, but I'm not that brash anymore. I don't think we live with the realization that we have it really good. But I think on the other hand, sometimes we live with that realization way too much because we're probably not as welcoming to the unlovely as we should be. I read a story one time, and it was told for the truth. There was a big mega church in this city, and one day after church had started, this guy came in, and he was obviously a street person. He didn't have shoes on. He had on tattered clothes, had really long, stringy hair. He hadn't bathed. He stunk. And he walked right in, and he walked up an aisle that was probably 5 times longer than this one, and walked up in the altar area and sat down on the floor. Just crossed his legs and sat down right there in the middle of the song service. Well, preacher was watching this, and one of the leaders in the church got up from the back in his high dollar suit, and he started walking up the aisle. And he thought he's gonna ask him to leave, and the preacher was hoping that wasn't what's gonna happen. And this guy got up, walked up, took his shoes off, and sat down beside him. How many of us would do that? You don't have to go far to see people who need to be loved. And he says it's time. It's time to wake up and realize that. Well, the second point goes along with it. He says in verse 11, and that knowing the time that is now high time to wake out of our sleep, for now is our salvation nearer than when we believed. If it's time to wake up, then secondly, it's time to look up. Look up. I think this is probably one of the curses of growing older and having been a Christian most of my life. I mean, I was saved when I was 10 years old, and I'm almost 69, so I've been saved a long time. But we kind of grow complacent in that.
Well, you know where you're going.
Yeah. Good point.
Yeah.
We forget about the opportunities that we're given every day. And we're so inner focused on ourselves. This good teaching, and like I said, I don't mean to get preachy, but remember, he said we had a debt to pay to love people. But if we don't see them, if we don't have our eyes open, and we're not looking up and looking around, we're not going to see them. And I think that's probably one of our main issues. We just don't do that. And he even gives some reasons for that. First of all, because time is short. We don't know how much time we have. I don't want to get really, really personal, but you all know that we have issues among family members. There's not a night goes by that Becky and I don't pray for our children. And one of the prayers I pray often, silently to myself or with my wife when we pray, I want to see my daughter walk with Christ again before I die. I'm not doing that selfishly, but I want to do it. But I've been praying that prayer since 2005. Listen, there's not as much time as there was in 2005 when I started praying that prayer. Do I believe he can do it? Yes. Do I think he will? Yes. All right. Paul says our salvation is nearer than when we first believed. I think we just kind of get lulled into this sleepiness. Yeah. Well, we're so busy with busyness. We're so busy with busyness. I'm telling a lot of stories tonight. 9/11 happened on a Tuesday morning, I believe. It was Tuesday morning. And, nobody knew what was going to happen. We didn't know. We witnessed what happened on TV live at the World Trade Center, and we watched firemen and police officers running toward what everybody was running away from, because that's what they do. And we watched the one topple before our eyes. I'm preaching in a little church. Really, at that time, Centerton has grown out. The city limits now are past that church, Centerton, because Centerton's grown so much. But I knew a lot of big churches in town. They would come across the prayer service at this church. And some people called and said, do you want to have a prayer service at the church? Do you think we should? And I said, yes, so we did. we didn't have great computer systems. Not as many people had computers then, and we didn't know what a smartphone was. You know, flip phones is what we still had. Sure miss it, by the way. But anyway, word of mouth got around. We were going to have a prayer service for our nation. We got there that night and we sang some patriotic songs, and that building just kept filling up. People I'd never seen in church before. People I'd never seen in that church before anyway. And I was moved at how, I don't mean this rude, but how spiritual people became in that moment. But we've been lulled into sleep, y'all.
Well, it's what you said before. Everything else didn't matter.
Right.
Right? We weren't worried about it.
Okay. It wasn't Wednesday night prayer meeting. It was Tuesday night, you know. But there was a need. And is that what it's going to take again? Something like that? Or is it the Lord going to just come back one day and he'll come back as a thief in the night and we won't be expecting it? That's the way he said it would be. You know, when Jesus was here, he said, you know, the night's going to come when nobody can work. And we don't realize that. If we have lost family members, lost neighbors, lost friends, just a word a word about God to them could make a difference. Comment? If I keep going, I'm going to get preachy. I wrote this in my notes. I'm skipping some stuff, and I wrote this in my notes, all right? I look around, and I see a lot of gray heads here tonight. Not all of them. Some of them ain't got no hair on them, all right? But I see a lot of gray heads. I are one. I can get by with this, okay? For us, we don't have as much time as we once did. I was thinking back when the Lord led me to this church. I became pastor in November of 1983. I was 29 years old. I don't know if I want to be 29 again, but I don't want to be 69 either, okay? But those of you who were here back then, we were all younger. And we thought we had a lot more time than we do now. You know, I remember the year I turned 35, we just moved into the clubhouse next door to the church, and I'll never forget, we moved in May. The reason I know that, because we moved in on Joel's birthday. 2 times when we moved on Joel's birthday, and he said, I'm tired of moving on my birthday. We moved in, and I turned 35 in August of that year, and I was very depressed. And I won't go into detail why. It had nothing to do with y'all, but I was very depressed. And I remember laying awake, woke up early. In fact, I got a weird phone call in the middle of that night. It was from some lady out of state. She's asking me, and how she got my phone number, I'll never know. She asked me if I knew some preacher named Hummingbird. You don't call me at 2 in the morning and asking me about some preacher named Hummingbird, but what? So anyway, I'm laying awake at night thinking, I know Hummingbird somewhere, you know. But anyway, I thought I've lived, if God gives me 70, I've lived half my life. And I remember thinking, man, I hope I do better the second half than I did the first. But when we're living it, we don't realize how fast time goes by.
We're just treading water.
Yeah. We're just living life, going on, raising families, trying to make ends meet. George Bernard Shaw said this, and I like it. Youth is such a wonderful thing, it's a shame to waste it on the young. Y'all got that, didn't you? I think most young people think they have a lot of time left. They may not. You know, Gerald Mitchell said old people have to die, but sometimes young people die. So we don't know. Well, thank you all for being here. Thank you all who joined us on Facebook Live. Appreciate you watching and listening. Yes, we are always this crazy if you're just now watching, but we appreciate it. I'm going to end our Facebook Live broadcast, and then we're going to dismiss in prayer. Come see us if you can. We're open every Sunday.